Hermeticism is a philosophical and religious system based on the purported teachings of Hermes Trismegistus, a Hellenistic conflation of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. These teachings are contained in the various writings attributed to Hermes, which were produced over a period spanning from around 300 BCE to 1200 CE, and may be very different in content and scope. One particular form of Hermetic teaching is the religio-philosophical system propounded by a specific subgroup of Hermetic writings known as the Religio-Philosophical Hermetica, the most famous of which is the Corpus Hermeticum. Hermes Trismegistus means Thrice-Great Hermes. It is debated why Hermes Trismegistus was called Thrice-Great, but it is thought that it is because he knows three parts of wisdom of the universe: alchemy, which is the operation of the sun; astrology, which is the operation of the stars; and theurgy, which is the operation of the gods. Hermes credited the creation of astrology to Zoroaster, founder of the Zoroastrian religion and Middle Eastern philosopher living sometime in the second half of the second millennium BCE. Hermes Trismegistus is considered the founder of science, religion, mathematics, geometry, alchemy, philosophy, medicine, and magic. As mentioned, he is a combination of the Egyptian Thoth, who was the god of wisdom, learning, and communications, and the Greek Hermes, who was the messenger of the gods. He is credited to have written somewhere between 20,000 to 36,525 works, of which 42 were kept in the Great Library of Alexandria, which was destroyed multiple times. A small handful of Hermes' texts remain today, most of which are compiled into the Corpus Hermeticum. It is said that Hermes Trismegistus received his divine wisdom in meditative trances. He covered topics such as medicine, chemistry, law, art, music, magic, philosophy, geography, mathematics, and anatomy. Hermes Trismegistus may have been an actual living king, philosopher, and priest, as well as a sage, scientist, and sorcerer. He was known by many names, and he was an amalgamation of several people and mythological figures of ancient history. In addition to Thoth and Hermes, which are the primary sources for Hermes Trismegistus, Mercury, the Roman adaptation of Hermes and the patron of commerce, is associated with him. Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, who ascends to heaven and becomes the archangel Metatron and celestial scribe, is affiliated with Hermes Trismegistus. Moses, Akhenaten, and Nabu, the Babylonian god of writing and wisdom, scribe of Marduk, and keeper of the tablets of destiny, are also included on that list. The main function of the various incarnations of Hermes is to transcribe the word of God, and his main symbol is the caduceus. In modern day, the term hermetically sealed is commonly used to mean airtight and impervious to gases. The word hermetic today typically means secret or sealed. Hermeticism was generally veiled in secrecy, and only those who were truly ready could receive the Hermetic teachings. Hermes is also said to have had magical powers that could seal a box or chest in such a way that it could never be opened. Hermetic philosophy, or Hermeticism, is one of the oldest religious and philosophical traditions which flourished in Ptolemaic Egypt. Hermeticism was not embodied in a single religious group, but instead was a philosophical system that is at the root of many traditions, some of which are still alive today. Hermeticism is a blend of ancient Egyptian religion, philosophy, science, and magic with elements of Greek paganism, Alexandrian Judaism, ancient Sumerian religion and Chaldean astrology, and Zoroastrianism. It is associated with the philosophical schools of Platonism, Neoplatonism, Stoicism, and Pythagoreanism. Hermeticism is said to hold Prisca Theologia, a doctrine that claims a true theology at the root of all religions that was given to man in antiquity. Hermeticism believes in one transient God and that all is one in the universe, though they also believe in the existence of other beings such as eons, angels, and elementals. Hermeticism influenced Judaism, Islam and Christianity, especially the early Christian Gnostics who were considered heretics. Much of the Hermetic and alchemical literature was destroyed, and the remainder shifted to the Islamic world in 400 to 600 CE, and eventually emerged in medieval Europe into the Renaissance. The Christians, starting with Emperor Constantine and his successors, erased almost every trace of Hermeticism from 312 CE until well into the 6th century, putting to death thousands of pagans, many of whom were Hermetic, and destroying temples and sacred texts. Being opposed by the Church, the Hermetic tradition was forced to the occult underground and permeates Western esoteric traditions. This includes secret societies such as the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, as well as modern paganism, New Age, and Wicca. The Greek philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer Pythagoras was said to be an initiate to the Hermetic arts, which he studied in Egypt. Plato was deeply influenced by Pythagoras and was also inspired by the Hermetic teachings. Some claim he also studied with the Egyptian masters. Both Pythagoras and Plato were influential for early modern scholars of the scientific revolution. The Greek philosopher and scientist Aristotle studied at Plato's academy in Athens from 328 to 347 BCE. He taught Alexander the Great starting in 343 BCE, who conquered Egypt in 331 BCE and founded Alexandria, a hub for alchemy and Hermeticism. Contrary to popular belief, Hermeticism, Neoplatonic mysticism, and natural magic had a remarkable influence on the scientific revolution, which began in the Renaissance period. Although the scientific revolution embraced empiricism, reason, and open inquiry over faith, mysticism, or dogma, the Renaissance saw a resurgence of Hermetic ideas as well as in mythical, metaphorical, and magical ways of thinking. Indeed, the fathers of modern science and the scientific method were deeply religious, and many were alchemists and esoterists, traditions rooted in Hermeticism. Hermetic principles can be seen in the works of luminaries such as Nicholas Copernicus, Johannes Kepler, Robert Boyle, Isaac Newton, and Francis Bacon, as well as medieval philosophers, notably Roger Bacon. Isaac Newton, the father of modern physics, spent most of his time rediscovering the occult wisdom of the ancients, including the Corpus Hermeticum and the Emerald Tablet. He was a devout scholar and practitioner of alchemy, which greatly influenced his scientific work, including the laws of motion, the theory of gravity, his work on optics, and the invention of calculus. Although there is a link between celestial and terrestrial realms in Hermeticism, there is the central idea of progress of knowledge and advancement of learning. In the Hermetic tradition, nature is investigated through observation, experiment, and illumination. The purpose is to discover and detect what is invisible and find the hidden linkages between things. The magical tradition within Hermeticism endeavors to discover the influence of one thing over another, to understand phenomena and learn how to manipulate them. While Hermeticism was influential in the rise of modern experimental science, part of the Hermetic tradition had to be repudiated for science to emerge. This includes a separation of science from religion and the spiritual world, as well as removing illumination as a way of obtaining knowledge. Until the mid-17th century, natural philosophy generally described nature as an organic, dynamic, living, interconnected organism. There was no clear distinction between astronomy and astrology, alchemy and chemistry, science and magic. The scientific revolution separated these disciplines and brought a mechanistic view of nature, a focus on rational and logical thought, and a separation of religion and spirituality from the pursuit of knowledge. In science, a phenomenon that is being observed is separated from the soul and the internal value system of the observer. When science observes a phenomenon, it assumes that it's nature. However, In the modern field of relativistic and quantum physics, observation affects the process being observed, with a different outcome than if the process were unobserved. In Hermeticism, that which is being studied is a reflection of the observer, and the two are intrinsically linked. This is central to Hermetic philosophy as seen in the famous phrase, "as above, so below." The universe is a symbolic reflection of what is happening inside of ourselves. The quest for knowledge becomes a spiritual journey to return to a state of unity with the divine, known as the great work of humankind. So now that we know what Hermeticism is, what does it mean? In the following two segments, we will delve into great detail regarding this question. We will first analyze and explain the Emerald Tablet of Thoth, and then we will address chapters 2 and 3 of the Kybalion. The Emerald Tablet of Hermes, also known as the Smaragdine Tablet, is a compact and cryptic piece of Hermetica reputed to contain the secret of the prima materia and its transmutation. The text of the Smaragdine Tablet gives its author as a legendary Hellenistic combination of the Greek god Hermes and the ancient Egyptian god Thoth. For this reason, it is sometimes called the Emerald Tablet of Thoth, and should not be confused with the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, a newer and much longer text. The Emerald Tablet is the foundation of Western alchemical thought and practice as we know it today. Alchemy is essentially the practical application of the Hermetic philosophy, contrary to the common perception which posits alchemy as a mere lust for gold. The exact origin of the tablet lies shrouded in mystery. The texts were most likely written by the ancient Greeks in the 2nd century AD, but their source is much older. The original document has not survived, and all we are left with are translations of it. There are quite a few different translations of the Emerald Tablet available. Of greatest impact on Western thought have been 3 12th century Latin versions, and the version presented here is the 12th century Latin translation from Still and Singer. True without falsehood, certain, most certain. What is above is like what is below, and what is below like that which is above, to make the miracle of the one thing. And as all things were made from contemplation of one, so all things were born from one adaptation. Its father is the sun, its mother is the moon. The wind carried it in its womb, the earth breastfed it. It is the father of all works of wonder in the world. Its power is complete if turned towards earth. It will separate earth from fire, the subtle from the gross. With great capacity it ascends from earth to heaven. Again it descends to earth and takes back the power of the above and the below. Thus you will receive the glory of the distinctiveness of the world. All obscurity will flee from you. This is the whole most strong strength of all strength, for it overcomes all subtle things and penetrates all solid things. Thus was the world created. From this comes marvelous adaptations, of which this is the procedure. Therefore I am called Hermes, thrice crowned, because I have 3 parts of the wisdom of the whole world. And complete is what I had to say about the work of the sun. The Emerald Tablet begins by stating that its words are universally true. There are many levels of truth, and the tablet here specifies that its words apply on all of these levels. In this way, the tablet gives us a key by which to test our understanding of its words. If, at any level of our experience, these words do not ring true, then our understanding of them needs to be broadened. Here, the Emerald Tablet defines the one thing as an infinite continuum. The term above, or any of its variant translations, establishes 2 concepts. 1, the starting point from which there is an above, and 2, an unlimited upwardness. The term below likewise establishes the starting point from which there is a below, an unlimited downwardness. The statement that above is like what is below and vice versa places them on an infinite continuum with only one thing clearly defined, the center, from which above and below stretch infinitely. In an infinite continuum, there is no point along the continuum from which above and below do not extend infinitely and thus equally. In this sense, the infinite continuum is one thing. Within the continuum, there is no such thing as a miracle in that the word implies an occurrence outside of nature's laws. What we assume to be miraculous is merely the interplay of nature's laws in ways that we do not comprehend. With that in mind, the tablet's statement of the miracle of the one thing implies that only at the level of the whole of the infinite continuum is the truly miraculous actuality, and that everything we do here within the continuum is merely the manipulation of nature's laws. Having established the infinite continuum, the one thing, the Emerald Tablet now turns to a discussion of the production of life within this continuum. The tablet posits the One as all mind and states that all things arise from the contemplation or meditation of this One. Each of these things within the continuum of self are self-conscious aspects of the One, of the all mind, mirroring the power of the One, and must follow the methods of the One. So as the One makes things by contemplation, these things must then birth what they desire by a similar process, by adaptation of the process followed by the One. The Emerald Tablet now describes this adapted process of creation. The imagery used is that of the human generative process, father, mother, womb, breastfed, which is concurrently correlated to geocentric symbols, sun, moon, wind and air, and earth. As an equation, it looks like this. This is the archetype of force, as opposed to form, of light as opposed to dark, of fire as opposed to water, of thought as opposed to physical matter. It is half a polarity, its existence implying the simultaneous existence of its opposite pole, mother and moon. Force, energy, creative intent, mind, whatever level of this archetype one employs, it always seeks expression in form. In a Hermetic sense, each specific vibration seeks expression through the levels of vibration which are directly below it. So, each specific vibration is the expression of that which lies above it, and simultaneously expresses itself through the levels below it. The creative process outlined in this section of the tablet is a downward movement of force into form. The upward movement of form into force comes later. The sperm of the father seeks the egg of the mother. The rhythm of the sun is bound to the earth by the rhythm of the moon. The individuality expresses itself through the personality. The mental infuses the astral. The light knows itself only when piercing the dark. This is the archetype of the form or forming. It is the continuous movement of energy down the scale of vibration, expressing itself through ever denser manifestation. It receives the sun's rays, changes them, and then reflects them to the earth. It wraps its womb around the egg which has captured the seed. Creation is primarily a mother's work, and this is shown by the next symbols, which are aspects of the mother archetype. In classical Hermetic treatment of the elements, air is seen as the product of fire and water, representing a synthesis of the two. Air acts as the intermediary between fire and water, and is in effect produced by their interaction. Each implies the existence of all three. They exist only in combination. We posit fire as upwardness and water as downwardness, then air would be a state of non-movement, a center between the two. Air has no movement of its own accord, yet adopts any movement which is impressed upon it. In the tablet's equation, the movement impressed upon the air is downward. Here the air is wind, implying a force behind it, and stressing that it is an expression of this force. The expression acts as a womb, carrying the creation through gestation to birth. The air clearly acts here as the agency of a downward force in its accretion of form. This is the inclusion of the other planetary influences into our earthly experience by the cycles of sun and moon. This is the individual self of the adept's consciousness, which expresses itself through the personality and physical body. Fire plus water plus air equal earth is a common conception of the elements' relationship, but at an archetypal level. Practically and functionally, however, earth is experienced as an individual element just like fire or water. This is the archetype of form itself. Whereas water is the tendency to form, earth is the product of this tendency, the final clothing given to force in its descent into expression. The earth nourishes the creation, giving it solid and independent form. This is the individual self, expressed through the personality within a physical body. These four elements combined, plus the fifth, the conscious awareness of the Creator, result in independent life. The tablet symbolizes this here by describing the result as a father, which brings us back to the beginning of our equation, finding its end and its beginning in an endless cycle of self-discovery. This nascent father is said to generate all works of wonder in the world. Note the distinction between works of wonder and miracle, implying that within the continuum, the father obeys the laws of nature. Of paramount importance in the process of creation outlined in the tablet is the factor of the Creator's conscious awareness. It is the fifth element, the quintessence, and though assumed throughout, it is never directly named. While the expression of the higher through the lower is a natural phenomena, it is only through the addition of conscious awareness that it produces the father of all works of wonder in the world. The product of the Emerald Tablet's downward equation of creation is a father, or in an elemental sense, a fire. This is an active force, though clothed in denser layers of vibration than father and son. This father, fire, is none other than the quintessence clothed in physical form, the power of conscious awareness as expressed through the human being. The tablet states that this power of conscious awareness is whole or complete if turned toward or cast to the earth. This means that conscious awareness at the human level, the Father Fire, reestablishes contact, implying then a participation in the whole with its more archetypal expressor, the Father, the Son. When it is turned inward to the self, clothed in densest matter, the earth. This turning inward upon itself is what initiates the cycle of return and brings us to the next equation, that of force arising from form. Whereas the tablet's first equation was a downward one of the addition of form onto force, this new father causes an opposite action, one of separation of force from form. The power of this introspection is twofold. A, it will separate earth from fire, and B, it will separate the subtle from the gross. With A, we see it separating the denser earth from the initial inspiration of its subtler fire. This is the quintessence working upon itself from the ground up. Its effectiveness begins from the starting point of its densest manifestation, separating itself from its self. This is a very apt description of the process of human introspection or of alchemical putrefaction and fermentation. Here the fire acts upon the whole and separates the earth from its fire, consciously shedding its clothing of matter. With the fire thus freed from its earth, the tablet leads us to the perspective of B, where there is a reaching down and a separating of the subtle, this time from the gross. A, which is fire minus earth, and B, which is gross minus subtle, are the same processes, but on different levels as seen from different perspectives. A from below and B from above. The action of the father/fire is one of separation throughout, but in A, that action is a movement from below toward above, and in B, it is an action from above reaching down into below to raise it to above. This outlines a double process of separation. First, the earth is removed from the fire, which implies an ascent of conscious awareness from earth to that of fire. This fire then acts upon itself anew, separating its own essence from its gross aspects. As a whole, it is a process of the Father Fire self-consciously releasing itself from form, almost a direct reversal of the initial creative process. Conscious awareness, now liberated from its clothing of form, rises upward through the levels of vibration within the continuum. It is a very subtle force, one which implies an inherent ability, a natural aspect of the self-realized awareness. This ascent is from earth, or the clothing of form, the below, to heaven, the above, or a state of no form, and completes the Emerald Tablet's second equation of force from form. The descent of force into form and its subsequent ascent back to a formless state is, however, a process of self-conscious awareness, an awareness that learns throughout the process. The force that originally descended into form is no longer the same. Now it has ascended. It has changed and been transformed by the experience of form. It now has the power, the wisdom, if you will, to descend anew into form, bringing with it the increased awareness of its nature as a force. Through its second descent into form, force integrates its above aspects within the below aspects and becomes a clear expression of the whole continuum of above and below. The result is a self-aware force consciously clothed in form, intentionally uniting the above with the below. The Emerald Tablet presents a threefold equation. 1. Force descends into form in an act of creation, which is a fourfold process. Number 2, force acts upon its informed self, consciously ascending to a formless state, and this is a threefold process. And number 3, self-realized force descends anew into form, seeking to consciously express its self therein, which is a one-step process. Through this sequence, force acquires a degree of self-realization, reconnects with the powers of its true source, and is transformed into a new Father which receives the glory of the world. Another active force is produced, this time with the symbols of light attributed to it, and is clearly a higher octave of the Father of all works of wonder in the world. This new Father/light has the power of understanding and wisdom, which illumines all darkness. Notice the progressive shift from a physically active force to a mentally active one. Here, the Emerald Tablet describes this new Father/light, the completely self-realized awareness. It does so in 3 parts, echoing the threefold pattern we see throughout. Part 1. The whole most strong strength of all strength. This is another triple superlative, similar to the opening line of true without falsehood, certain most certain. Strength implies a usable storehouse of force, and here we see that this force is applicable on all levels. It is even effective with all other levels of force, as this Father/light is the most strong of all the active forces within the continuum. Please note the similarity between this aspect of the Father/light and the initial fourfold process of creation. Both are downwardly active, initiated from above upon below. Part 2, it overcomes all subtle things. This is the Father/light's upward power to surpass any upward tending thing. The second part of the Emerald Tablet's threefold equation, that of the upward movement of force from form, is echoed here and attributed as a power of the Father/light. Part 3 penetrates all solid things. This is the Father/light's downward power to inhabit any denser vibration of matter. The active force represented here is equivalent to the third part of the Emerald Tablet's equation, that of the conscious redescent of force into form. Father/light, the product of the Emerald Tablet's threefold equation, mirrors the attributes of the one thing, the whole of the infinite continuum. It appears capable of an equal creativity, but only within the continuum, an octave lower than the miracle of the one thing, an expression of it. This, of course, implies an infinite, cyclical process of continual recreation. This is a very deep statement. The Corpus Hermeticum describes a similar sequential, cyclical process of force descending into form, becoming self-aware and then creative anew, followed by another descent further into form. The eventual result is the world. This says something very different about the world around us. It says that everything is alive. Everything, every person, animal, tree, rock, drop of water, pile of dung, everything is alive and is the product of the one thing. Each thing has the power of the Father/light tucked away inside of it. No matter at what level of manifestation we look, this is true, without falsehood, certain, most certain. Here we see into the heart of alchemy as the Emerald Tablet states that every natural thing has the Father/light within it, and each thing is therefore the seed of its future self. It is at this level of marvelous adaptation that we humans intervene, for we must, as physical beings, work with the substance of the world. We work within the continuum, mirroring the powers of the one thing, performing marvelous adaptations as opposed to the miracle of the one thing. Conscious awareness within a physical body is an example of force within form of the above inhabiting the below. This is what we have to work with. This is the world upon which we turn our fire, our Father/light, and self-craft our future selves. What has preceded this point in the Emerald Tablet has been a description of the natural processes of the formation of our prima materia, the world. Only now do we come to the procedure which we create our marvelous adaptations, and this is revealed in the two closing lines. These lines break down to three sections that echo the overall threefold nature of the Emerald Tablet. A. Therefore, I am called Hermes, thrice crowned. Therefore implies a sense of consequence, and I am called implies a second-hand knowing. This is the initial bringing of force into form, the novice studying, praying, and experimenting, the Father/light turning upon itself with its fire in cyclic adaptation of the process of the one thing, the seed rotting in the earth, dynamizing the power which will inevitably spring forth. Hermes thrice crowned is a very potent and broad symbol. Briefly, it is a symbol of the three-in-one, an image of thesis, synthesis, and antithesis combined. It is sun and moon and everything that lies between these two archetypes. More to the point, in this context, is that it represents the power that center has within infinite continuum. It can occur anywhere and or everywhere, and is in effect a mobile, self-directed agent of the whole. That Hermes is thrice crowned is an indication that this power is active on the three levels of physical, astral, and mental. Section A clearly mirrors the first part of the Emerald Tablet's basic equation, the creative descent of force into form, the inevitable, natural result of which is the Father/fire who initiates the subsequent ascent. B. Because I have three parts of the wisdom of the whole world. Here there is a sense of personal knowing, of I have indicating individual experience. The actual possession of the three fathers is implied by the term wisdom. And here we also see that they are powerful within the whole continuum. This represents the achievement of the second part of the Emerald Tablet's equation, that of ascent of force from form. There is also an indication that this process is to be accomplished 3 times, mentally, astrally, and physically. Please note how this wisdom of the whole world is a slightly different expression of the Father of all works, of wonder in the world. C. And complete is what I had to say about the work of the Sun. As in Part 3 of the Emerald Tablet's equation, the procedure of marvelous adaptation is made complete by the conscious redescent of force into form. Here, this is symbolized by the phrase, what I had to say, which implies a past tense, intentional expression of an idea through words. Work of the Sun is another broad symbol. In short, it points here to the fact that this is an active process within the continuum. The sun also implies a specific rhythm, symbolically uniting the fourfold elements and the threefold principles in its journey through the 12-fold zodiac. This threefold procedure of marvelous adaptations is very similar to the Emerald Tablet's archetypal equation, yet has distinct differences, occurring as it does on a lower octave within the continuum. Okay, here's a recap. The Emerald Tablet outlines an essential three-part equation. Number 1, the creative descent of force into form, a 4-step process. Number 2, the ascent of force from form in a conscious act of self-realization, which is a 3-step process. And number 3, the redescent of self-aware force into form, which is a 1-step process. In the first part of the equation, the Father/Son acts as the initial agent of the one thing, producing the Father of all works of wonder in the world, or the Father/Fire as has been designated here. The Father/Fire is the active agent of the second part of the equation and produces the Father/Light, who redescends in the third and final part. This equation cycles 3 times throughout the Emerald Tablet. In the first cycle, the one thing produces the initial Father/Light. The second cycle is that of the Father/Light acting upon itself, producing the world. And the third cycle is represented by human action, those marvelous adaptations performed upon the prima materia of the world. The Emerald Tablet is one of the root texts of humanity, a bit of archetypal poetic symbolism, which presents a different glimmer of wisdom to each who approaches it each time it is approached. This principle embodies the truth that all is mind. It explains that the all, which is the substantial reality underlying all the outward manifestations and appearances which we know under the terms of the material universe, the phenomena of life, matter, energy, and in short, all that is apparent to our material senses, is spirit, which in itself is unknowable and undefinable, but which may be considered and thought of as a universal, infinite, living mind. It also explains that all the phenomenal world or universe is simply a mental creation of the all, subject to the laws of created things, and that the universe as a whole, and in its parts or units, has its existence in the mind of the all, in which mind we live and move and have our being. This principle, by establishing the mental nature of the universe, easily explains all of the varied mental and psychic phenomena that occupy such a large portion of the public attention, and which, without such explanation, are non-understandable and defy scientific treatment. An understanding of this great Hermetic principle of mentalism enables the individual to readily grasp the laws of the mental universe and to apply the same to his well-being and advancement. The Hermetic student is enabled to apply intelligently the great mental laws instead of using them in a haphazard manner. With the master key in his possession, the student may unlock the many doors of the mental and psychic temple of knowledge and enter the same freely and intelligently. This principle explains the true nature of energy, power, and matter, and why and how all these are subordinate to the mastery of mind. One of the old Hermetic masters wrote, long ages ago, "He who grasps the truth of the mental nature of the universe is well advanced on the path to mastery." And these words are as true today as at the time they were first written. Without the master key, mastery is impossible, and the student knocks in vain at the many doors of the temple. This principle embodies the truth that there is always a correspondence between the laws and phenomena of the various planes of being and life. The old Hermetic axiom ran in these words, "As above, so below, as below, so above." And the grasping of this principle gives one the means of solving many dark paradox and hidden secret of nature. There are planes beyond our knowing, but when we apply the principle of correspondence to them, we are able to understand much that would otherwise be unknowable to us. This principle is of universal application and manifestation on the various planes of the material, mental, and spiritual universe. It is a universal law. The ancient Hermetists considered this principle as one of the most important mental instruments by which man was able to pry aside the obstacles which hid from view the unknown. Its use even tore aside the veil of Isis to the extent that a glimpse of the face of the goddess might be caught. Just as a knowledge of the principles of geometry enables man to measure distant suns and their movements while seated in his observatory, so a knowledge of the principle of correspondence enables man to reason intelligently from the known to the unknown. Studying the monad, he understands the archangel. This principle embodies the truth that everything is in motion, everything vibrates, nothing is at rest. Facts which modern science endorses and which each new scientific discovery tends to verify. And yet, this Hermetic principle was enunciated thousands of years ago by the masters of ancient Egypt. This principle explains that the differences between the different manifestations of matter, energy, mind, and even spirit result largely from varying rates of vibration. From the all, which is pure spirit, down to the grossest form of matter, all is in vibration. The higher the vibration, the higher the position in the scale. The vibration of spirit is at such an infinite rate of intensity and rapidity that it is practically at rest, just as a rapidly moving wheel seems to be motionless. And at the other end of the scale, there are gross forms of matter whose vibrations are so low as to seem at rest. Between these poles, there are millions upon millions of varying degrees of vibration. From corpuscle and electron, atom and molecule, to worlds and universes, everything is in vibratory motion. This is also true on the planes of energy and force, which are but varying degrees of vibration, and also on the mental planes, whose states depend upon vibration, and even onto the spiritual planes. An understanding of this principle with the appropriate formulas enables Hermetic students to control their own mental vibrations as well as those of others. The masters also apply this principle to the conquering of natural phenomena in various ways. He who understands the principle of vibration has grasped the scepter of power, says one of the old writers. This principle embodies the truth that everything is dual. Everything has two poles. Everything has its pair of opposite, all of which were old Hermetic axioms. It explains the old paradoxes that have perplexed so many, which have been stated as follows. Thesis and antithesis are identical in nature, but different in degree. Opposites are the same, differing only in degree. The pairs of opposites may be reconciled. Extremes meet. Everything is and isn't at the same time. All truths are but half-truths. Every truth is half false. There are two sides to everything, etc., etc., etc. It explains that in everything there are two poles or opposite aspects, and that opposites are really only the two extremes of the same thing, with many varying degrees between them. To illustrate, heat and cold, although opposites, are really the same thing, the differences consisting merely of degrees of the same thing. Look at your thermometer and see if you can discover where heat terminates and cold begins. There is no such thing as absolute heat or absolute cold. The two terms heat and cold simply indicate varying degrees of the same thing, and that same thing which manifests as heat and cold is merely a form, variety, and rate of vibration. So, heat and cold are simply the two poles of that which we call heat, and the phenomena attendant thereupon are manifestations of the principle of polarity. The same principle manifests in the case of light and darkness, which are the same thing, the difference consisting of varying degrees between the two poles of the phenomena. Where does darkness leave off and light begin? What is the difference between large and small, between hard and soft, between black and white, between sharp and dull, between noise and quiet, between high and low, between positive and negative? The principle of polarity explains these paradoxes, and no other principle can supersede it. The same principle operates on the mental plane. Let us take a radical and extreme example, that of love and hate, two mental states apparently totally different, and yet there are degrees of hate and degrees of love, and a middle point in which we use the terms like or dislike, which shade into each other so gradually that sometimes we are at a loss to know whether we like or dislike or neither. And all are simply degrees of the same thing, as you will see if you will but think a moment. And more than this, and considered of more importance by the Hermetist, it is possible to change the vibrations of hate to the vibrations of love in one's own mind and in the minds of others. Many of you who read these lines have had personal experiences of the involuntary rapid transition from love to hate, and the reverse, in your own case and that of others, and you will therefore realize the possibility of this becoming accomplished by the use of the will, by means of the Hermetic formulas. Good and evil are but the poles of the same thing, and the Hermetist understands the art of transmuting evil into good by means of an application of the principle of polarity. In short, the art of polarization becomes a phase of mental alchemy known and practiced by the ancient and modern Hermetic masters. An understanding of the principle will enable one to change his own polarity as well as that of others, if he will devote the time and study necessary to master the art. This principle embodies the truth that in everything there is manifested a measured motion, to and fro, a flow and inflow, a swing backward and forward, a pendulum-like movement, a tide-like ebb and flow, a high tide and low tide, between the two poles which exist in accordance with the principle of polarity described a moment ago. There is always an action and a reaction, an advance and a retreat, a rising and a sinking. This is in the affairs of the universe, suns, worlds, men, animals, mind, energy, and matter. This law is manifest in the creation and destruction of worlds, in the rise and fall of nations, in the life of all things, and finally in the mental states of man. And it is with the latter that the Hermetists find the understanding of the principle most important. The Hermetists have grasped this principle, finding its universal application, and have also discovered certain means to overcome its effects in themselves by the use of appropriate formulas and methods. They apply the mental law of neutralization. They cannot annul the principle or cause it to cease its operation, but they have learned how to escape its effects upon themselves to a certain degree, depending upon the mastery of the principle. They have learned how to use it instead of being used by it. In this and similar methods consists the art of the Hermetist. The master of Hermetics polarizes himself at the point at which he desires to rest, and then neutralizes the rhythmic swing of the pendulum which would tend to carry him to the other pole. All individuals who have attained any degree of self-mastery do this to a certain degree, more or less unconsciously, but the master does this consciously, and by the use of his will, and attains a degree of poise and mental firmness almost impossible of belief on the part of the masses who are swung backward and forward like a pendulum. This principle and that of polarity have been closely studied by the Hermetist, and the methods of counteracting, neutralizing, and using them form an important part of the Hermetic mental alchemy. This principle embodies the fact that there is a cause for every effect, an effect from every cause. It explains that everything happens according to law, that nothing ever merely happens, that there is no such thing as chance, that while there are various planes of cause and effect, the higher dominating the lower planes, still nothing ever entirely escapes the law. The Hermetists understand the art and methods of rising above the ordinary plane of cause and effect to a certain degree, and by mentally rising to a higher plane they become causers instead of effects. The masses of people are carried along, obedient to the environment, the wills and desires of others stronger than themselves, heredity, suggestion, and other outward causes moving them about like pawns on the chessboard of life. But the masters rising to the plane above dominate their moods, characters, qualities, and powers, as well as the environment surrounding them, and become movers instead of pawns. They help to play the game of life instead of being played and moved about by others' wills and environment. They use the principle instead of being its tools. The masters obey the causation of the higher planes, but they help to rule on their own plane. In this statement, there is condensed a wealth of Hermetic knowledge. Let him read who can. This principle embodies the truth that there is gender manifested in everything, the masculine and feminine principles ever at work. This is true not only of the physical plane, but of the mental and even the spiritual planes. On the physical plane, the principle manifests as sex. On the higher plane, it takes higher forms, but the principle is ever the same. No creation, physical, mental, or spiritual, is possible without this principle. An understanding of its laws will throw light on many a subject that has perplexed the minds of men. The principle of gender works ever in the direction of generation, regeneration, and creation. Everything and every person contains the two elements or principles, or this great principle within it, him or her. Every male thing has the female element also. Every female contains also the male principle. If you would understand the philosophy of mental and spiritual creation, generation, and regeneration, you must understand and study this Hermetic principle. It contains the solution of many mysteries of life. As we have stated, the Hermetists were the original alchemists, astrologers, and psychologists, Hermes having been the founder of these schools of thought. From astrology has grown modern astronomy. From alchemy has grown modern chemistry. From the mystic psychology has grown the modern psychology of the schools. But it must not be supposed that the ancients were ignorant of that which the modern schools suppose to be their exclusive and special property. The records engraved on the stones of ancient Egypt show conclusively that the ancients had a full comprehensive knowledge of astronomy, the very building of the pyramids showing the connection between their design and the study of astronomical science. Nor were they ignorant of chemistry, for the fragments of the ancient writings show that they were acquainted with the chemical properties of things. In fact, the ancient theories regarding physics are being slowly verified by the latest discoveries of modern science, notably those relating to the constitution of matter. Nor must it be supposed that they were ignorant of the so-called modern discoveries in psychology. On the contrary, the Egyptians were especially skilled in the science of psychology, particularly in the branches that the modern schools ignore, but which nevertheless are being uncovered under the name of psychic science, which is perplexing the psychologists of today and making them reluctantly admit that there may have been something in it after all. The truth is that beneath the material chemistry, astronomy, and psychology, that is, the psychology in its phase of brain action, the ancients possessed a knowledge of transcendental astronomy called astrology, of transcendental chemistry called alchemy, of transcendental psychology called mystic psychology. They possessed the inner knowledge as well as the outer knowledge, the latter alone being possessed by modern scientists. Among the many secret branches of knowledge possessed by the Hermetists was that known as mental transmutation, which forms the subject matter of this lesson. Transmutation is a term usually employed to designate the ancient art of the transmutation of metals, particularly of the base metals into gold. The word transmute means to change from one nature, form, or substance into another, to transform. And accordingly, mental transmutation means the art of changing and transforming mental states, forms, and conditions into others. So you may see that mental transmutation is the art of mental chemistry. If you like the term, a form of practical mystic psychology. But this means far more than appears on the surface. Transmutation, alchemy, or chemistry on the mental plane is important enough in its effects to be sure, and if the art stopped there, it would still be one of the most important branches of study known to man. But this is only the beginning. Let us see why. The first of the 7 Hermetic principles is the principle of mentalism, the axiom of which is, the all is mind and the universe is mental, which means that the underlying reality of the universe is mind, and the universe itself is mental, that is, existing in the mind of the all. We shall consider this principle in succeeding lessons, but let us see the effect of the principle if it be assumed to be true. If the universe is mental in its nature, then mental transmutation must be the art of changing the conditions of the universe along the lines of matter, force, and mind. So you see, therefore, that mental transmutation is really the magic of which the ancient writers had so much to say in their mystical works, and about which they gave so few practical instructions. If all be mental, then the art which enables one to transmute mental conditions must render the master the controller of material conditions as well as those ordinarily called mental. As a matter of fact, none but advanced mental alchemists have been able to attain the degree of power necessary to control the grosser physical conditions, such as the control of the elements of nature, the production or cessation of tempests, the production and cessation of earthquakes, and other great physical phenomena. But that such men have existed and do exist today is a matter of earnest belief to all advanced occultists of all schools. That the masters exist and have these powers, the best teachers assure their students, having had experience which justify them in such belief and statements. These masters do not make public exhibitions of their powers, but seek seclusion from the crowds of men in order to better work their way along the path of attainment. We mention their existence at this point merely to call your attention to the fact that their power is entirely mental and operates along the lines of the higher mental transmutation under the Hermetic principle of mentalism. But students and Hermetists of lesser degree than masters, the initiates and teachers, are able to freely work along the mental plane in mental transmutation. In fact, all that we call psychic phenomena, mental influence, mental science, new thought phenomena, etc., operates along the same general lines, for there is but one principle involved, no matter by what name the phenomena is called. The student and practitioner of mental transmutation works among the mental plane, transmuting mental conditions, states, etc., into others according to various formulas more or less efficacious. The various treatments, affirmations, denials, etc. of the schools of mental science are but formulas, often quite imperfect and unscientific, of the Hermetic art. The majority of modern practitioners are quite ignorant compared to the ancient masters, for they lack the fundamental knowledge upon which the work is based. Not only may the mental states, etc., of oneself be changed or transmuted by Hermetic methods, but also the states of others may be and are constantly transmuted in the same way, usually unconsciously, but often consciously by some understanding the laws and principles, in cases where the people affected are not informed of the principles of self-protection. And more than this, as many students and practitioners of modern mental science know, every material condition, depending upon the minds of other people, may be changed or transmuted in accordance with the earnest desire, will, and treatments of person desiring changed conditions of life. The public are so generally informed regarding these things at present that we do not deem it necessary to mention the same at length, our purpose at this point being merely to show the Hermetic principle and art underlying all of these various forms of practice, good and evil, for the force can be used in opposite directions according to the Hermetic principles of polarity. In this little book we shall state the basic principles of mental transmutation, that all who read may grasp the underlying principles and thus possess the master key that will unlock the many doors of the principle of polarity. We shall now proceed to a consideration of the first of the Hermetic 7 principles, the principle of mentalism, in which is explained the truth that the all is mind, the universe is mental, in the words of the Kabbalion. We ask the close attention and careful study of this great principle on the part of our students, for it is really the basic principle of the whole Hermetic philosophy and of the Hermetic art of mental transmutation.